At one point or another, we've probably all heard the saying that not all calories are equal. What does this mean? Is it true? False? If you've ever tried to lose weight by counting calories and found it doesn't work, then you are in the right place. I am going to explain why people say not all calories are equal and the science behind it, both from the nutritionist side of things, explaining what is in the calories, and the biology side, explaining how our bodies then use these calories when they are consumed. We'll be mentioning the Atwater values and systems frequently. He was a nutritional scientist from the late 1800s who studied food and the calories contained in them. Today, the nutrition labels seen on the foods we eat are still based on the research he did. That's right, our current calorie measuring system is based on a system that was made over 100 years ago. Think about how far science has come in that time. If it's making you wonder how accurate our calorie counting is and how trustworthy those labels on our foods are, you're starting to see one of the many flaws in calorie counting my research found. More on that soon. Let's first understand the science of what he did. You can see on the chart the basic idea. We'll need to briefly discuss what our body does when we eat. We'll start with digestion, which is the process that disassembles the large complex protein, fat, and carbohydrate structures that are uniquely characteristic to particular foods. This is turned into amino acids, fatty acids, and simple sugars. Then we have absorption, which brings the amino acids, fatty acids, and sugars from the digestive tract into the interior of the body. Excretion gets rid of the waste products of digestion and metabolism through feces and urine. And then we have metabolism, which disassembles the products of digestion into even smaller pieces or uses them to construct body tissues. Eventually, it converts whatever small pieces remain into carbon dioxide and water. As you can probably guess, that carbon dioxide is released when we breathe, the water when we urinate, and throughout this metabolism, the various oxidation reactions are what is releasing the energy into our body that we can then use. Digestion is the process of taking anything that was once alive and edible and turning its proteins, fats, and carbohydrates into amino acids, fatty acids, and sugars that you can then metabolize for your own energy or to build your own tissues. Excretion is the loss of calories in the unabsorbed food we consume. Some of this may be familiar to you in various diet drinks or even diet trends you've tried. The food you consume can't be broken down by our bodies, so the calories don't count. A common one is artificial sweeteners. A more natural one is leafy vegetables that provide fiber. Absorbing the nutrients in those becomes easier if the plants are cooked. The takeaway here is that natural fats are 97% digested. That is why so many diets want you to steer clear of consuming fats, because your body is absolutely going to absorb all of those calories. Your body may or may not absorb all the calories in other foods, such as the vegetables you're eating. Figuring out your basal metabolic rate is a lot of math, but the good news here is the science is sound and accurate. The scientists I used for this research state the online calculators you find are close enough. So rest assured that if you're using these, you are getting close enough correct calorie intake numbers, so long as your calculator is asking for your age, height, weight, and gender. These calculators are going to tell you how many calories a day you need, and 2/3 of those calories are going towards your basal metabolism, unless you engage in a great deal of physical activity. There is debate about whether regulating body temperature uses calories, and this is true. However, scientists have decided that the difference the body temperature regulation makes in burning calories is so small, it is not necessary to include it in any calculations. So if you think being out in the heat or being in extreme cold are going to give you more calories you can burn, it is true, but it's such a small difference, it's not worth changing your daily intake of calories. Today we have apps that do all the math for us, calculating how many calories we should consume a day and how many calories we're burning when we're being active. This chart gives you an example of how those calories are burned when we're doing activities. And yes, the larger you are, the more calories you burn doing activities. That is true. Again, that's why it's important to plug all of your information into those apps so it's doing the calculations correctly. I wanted to show this because it's a good example of how the more you weigh, the more calories you're burning when you're doing activities. In my research, I found only one answer for the question of that person who's always losing weight and claims they have a fast metabolism. Is there any science that explains why those people are that way? The question usually comes to, oh, they have a different metabolism, which yes, we all do, and we all can use those calculators, but there's that always question of, do some people just burn more calories naturally? Like, are they just genetically different? So I was surprised in my research. I did find a scientific reason why some people just magically burn more calories. And the answer is spontaneous non-exercise activity, also known as fidgeting, burns calories. I know this isn't a explains it for everyone, but it does show that a person who fidgets all day, that little leg twitcher or just can't sit still person, they are burning 100 to 800 calories a day just from that fidgeting. If you want to try out fidgeting as a method to lose weight, it can be as simple as standing instead of sitting, standing desk, or pacing in the back of a room during a meeting. Those are all things that scientists say are fidgeting. I wanted to briefly touch on alcohol, which is known as secret calories, because it's incredibly difficult to calculate how many calories you're consuming when you are consuming alcohol. Alcohol is also known as empty calories because they provide little to no nutrition. Alcohol is considered food because it does contain calories. However, it's not regulated by the FDA as food. So the labels do not always have to say what the calorie amount is. As you can see on the slide, some of these calories are optional, some they have to list the calories. Most of the time, you're going to have to do the math on your own to figure out how many calories you're intaking from your alcoholic beverage. I've put the equation there. As you can see, it's complicated. So your big thing here is odds are you're not accurately counting your calories on your alcohol. It takes 3,500 calories to create 1 pound of fat. The more you weigh, the more calories you need to maintain that weight. So when you lose a bunch of weight, you commonly gain it back because you're trying to eat like you did before you lost the weight, but Now that you weigh less, you require less calories every day. That's the common pitfall people fall into. You're not going to go into starvation mode unless you're truly not eating. When you hear people say they're worried their body's going to go into starvation mode, they're actually worried they're going to have a lowered BMR, that basal metabolic rate, because that will go down when you're constantly eating less food. It's a normal, natural thing. Your body's adapting to the less calories you're giving it. So when you weigh less, you're going to have a lower basal metabolic rate. It's just what's going to happen. But no one is going to go into starvation mode unless they have just stopped eating altogether. The origin of the low-carb diet and the whole not all calories are equal originated with David Jenkins at the University of Toronto, who was studying different food sources and their effect on blood glucose. He found that foods that are rapidly digested, like sugars and starches, cause a spike in blood glucose, whereas foods higher in protein, fat, and that are just generally less rapidly digestible, like whole grain and fibers, do not cause that spike and instead give you a glucose amount that persists for a longer period. The study concluded that habitual eating of easily digested carbohydrates will lead to weight gain. Journalist Gary Taubes built on this and stated that carbohydrates alone are responsible for obesity. He cited studies that showed obese people do not consume more calories than lean people. However, this was factually wrong because it has been proven that obese people always underreport their calorie intake in any study that relies on people to self-report their calorie intake. And all of the studies that Taubes was citing are studies that relied on self-reporting. Studies that were done under tightly controlled hospital conditions, where the calories were counted by staff, found that it makes no difference where the calories come from in regards to weight loss. In an introductory nutrition class at New York University, students were asked how many calories were in an 8-ounce soda and how many calories are in a 64-ounce soda. Regardless of whether or not they knew how many calories were in the 8-ounce soda, 70% of them could not do the simple math to correctly calculate how many calories were in the 64-ounce soda. All they needed to do was calculate whatever guess they came up with by 8, but instead they were calculating with 3. The correct answer is 100 calories in an 8-ounce soda, which means a 64-ounce soda has 800 calories. The students refused to believe this math, leading the scientists and researchers to wonder why. The students explained that the reason they refused to believe the math was because soda packaging never says 800 calories. It says 100 calories per serving. This marketing ploy has tricked not only students, but trained nutritionists who, when they are presented with this same problem and same question, they refuse to accept the math that a 64-ounce soda is 800 calories. Even trained nutritionists who are asked to guess calories in restaurant settings are underestimating how many calories are in the meals by 30%. This gets even more inaccurate when the food portions are larger and the food appears healthy. Same for if the bowl is bigger, more in the bowl is eaten. Some research suggests that overweight people tend to underestimate the number of calories in their food to a greater extent than those of normal weight. However, most research finds nearly everyone underestimates their calorie intake, regardless of their body weight or if they're dieting or not. People tend to underestimate the calories in foods that they perceive as healthy. This has led researchers to suggest that health claims cause a systematic bias in calorie perception, dubbed a health halo. People assume a healthy product has less calories. When portions are labeled small, people believe they are eating fewer calories, regardless of the calories the food contains or its actual size. In addition, any health label will encourage customers to believe that the calories don't count or don't count as much. Some diet books claim that certain foods use up more calories in digestion, absorption, and metabolism than they contain in the first place, and that their thermic effects are greater than their calorie values. However, this is not possible. The maximum thermic effect of food is 20 to 30%, and that's usually for protein, and that still leaves plenty of calories left over. The only situation where there are negative calories is drinking ice water. An entire quart of ice water would burn 100 calories. And though research does say this is true, it is not recommended because a quart of water is a lot of water to consume, and drinking that much ice water is uncomfortable in massive amounts. Another negative calorie effect is people thinking that if they're eating healthy food with an unhealthy food, that this results in the overall meal being less calories. For example, a group was polled regarding here's a bowl of chili, how many calories do you think it is? And then here's a bowl of chili with a side salad, how many calories do you think it is? And everyone thought that adding the salad actually lowered how many calories were in that meal. And of course, this is false. This is bias and a trick our brain does. Adding a side salad to a meal adds more calories to the overall meal. Another claim for negative calorie effect is a negative calorie diet based on negative calorie foods that require your body to burn more calories than the actual calorie content of the food. This is based on low calorie, high nutrient dense fruits and vegetables, which you should be eating if you're dieting. And these are common things: celery, grapefruit, lemon, lime, da da da. And again, they're trying to convince you that eating that food, you burn all the calories when you're eating it. And this is false. Even something with low calories, like a stick of celery that's only 6 calories, it only takes half a calorie to digest that. Again, there is no food that has calories where you're going to come out with a negative amount in digesting it. The only one this can possibly pertain to is straight up ice water. I'm sure we've all heard the sugar is toxic narrative, so I wanted to briefly mention it and explain the science behind it. Sugar is often declared public enemy number one, saying it causes obesity, insulin resistance, hypertension, coronary heart disease, and fatty liver. This is not new. Such propaganda has been spread around since the 18th century. Fructose and glucose are both carbohydrates, and in our bodies, they're both turned into simple sugars. You may recall that earlier in the presentation, the breakdown of what our body turns things into. So, in these studies, you have to keep in mind that the average diet consumes more than 5 times the amount of glucose than they do fructose. So you get more glucose in your diet than you do fructose. And reminder, your glucose is your rice, cereals, corn, and potatoes. Now explaining why the fructose gets demonized so much. Glucose can be metabolized by virtually all the body tissues in your body, whereas fructose is primarily dealt with by the liver. So most of the negativity regarding fructose is directly linked to the potential that fructose is going to be converted into fat by the liver and other stresses that it could put on the liver. What is commonly overlooked in these studies is that the intake of fructose needs to be 100 grams or more a day in order for the liver to convert that fructose into fat and to be stressed by it. That's about 4 cans of your average soda. And most consumers do not consume that much fructose in a day. Ultimately, moderate intake of fructose and sugar is not toxic, as I think can be said for a lot of things. Of course, excessive intake of anything is going to stress parts of your body. Same with fructose. So the sugar is toxic narrative is only true if it's on an excessive amount of consumption. Scientists at the Agricultural Research Service tested the bioavailable energy known as calories and compared it to what is shown on the nutrition label, which is based off the Atwater science. If you'll recall, that was science from over 100 years ago. Using fecal and urine samples, scientists found that not only were people absorbing far less calories than thought, but the method of food preparation matters. For raw nuts, they tested pistachios, almonds, and walnuts. And as you can see on the slide, everything was less. 153 versus 169, 129 versus 170, and 146 versus 189. When you look at how they're prepared, raw were 25% less calories, whole roasted 19% less calories, and chopped were 17% less calories. Again, that is, your body is absorbing less calories than what is advertised on the nutrition label. Almonds have 32% less calories than what is listed on the nutrition label. This explains why people who consume a lot of nuts are not excessively overweight. We have been overcounting for the calories in nuts. And if you think about it, this is just one food that has been studied in new ways, and we found this. More research needs to be done on other food groups to see what the true calorie count is. In Why Calories Count by Marion, Nestle, and Malden, Nesheim, they've concluded the source of calories may make a small difference in weight management or loss, but it appears to be much less important than the ability to resist pressures to overeat calories in general. As I'm sure you've heard before, a balanced diet is the best diet. Are calories equal? The answer is no, but the difference is minor. Counting calories does work. This presentation was created in 2024 as a student project from Middle Georgia State University and is for educational purposes only and does not substitute for professional medical advice. Information is from Why Calories Count by Marion, Nestle, and Malden, Nesheim. Also, the Food, Culture, and Society, an international journal of multidisciplinary research, and from the United States Department of Agriculture.